Jon Kabat-Zinn kennt den Benediktushof, hat hier zuletzt 2008 Kurse gegeben, kannte Willigis Jäger und es ist ihm ein Herzensanliegen, heute Abend mit dabei zu sein, um Willigis zu ehren. Ich weiß, Jon hört schon zu. Jon, thank you so much for that. A confluence of streams, potential benefits and pitfalls from the intersection of science with mindfulness, meditation practice and universal Dharma. Wörtlich kann man das vielleicht übersetzen mit das Zusammenfließen von Strömen, potenzielle Vorteile und Fallstricke aus der Schnittmenge von Wissenschaft mit Achtsamkeits-, Meditationspraxis und universellen Dharma. I'm very happy to welcome Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you all for coming. I'm really very moved to see you in the hall at Benediktushofs. I remember that hall extremely well. I led several 7-day retreats where you're sitting right now for several hundred people. And so it's an absolute delight for me to be back in Benediktushofs, even remotely, and to engage with your community in celebrating the life of Willigis Jäger, who, as you heard during the introduction, I met on several occasions when I was there, and had several really lovely conversations about the arc of his life and how these two streams of Dharma, however one understands that, and science and medicine are converging now in ways that would have been virtually inconceivable even 60 or 70 years ago. And as you again heard in the introduction, that started, this work with mindfulness-based stress reduction started in 1979 at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And from a tiny little beginning, it really has spread around the world. And I have to say that that's probably much more because the time was right and the Dharma supplied something in the world that was extremely needed and sorely missing at that time. And we found ways to language it so that regular people could hear and understand this, whether they had any interest in Buddhism or Dharma or meditation whatsoever. And we tried to characterize it in a way that was completely commonsensical. My original aim really being that the world would be a better place if all of us, every human being on the planet, in whatever way we understood the word, could take some time to move from all the being, from all the doing that we do as human beings, to actually learning how to inhabit the domain of being. In those days, we didn't really have enough evidence on a biological and a sort of physiological level, and certainly a neuroscientific level, to actually recognize that meditative practices that look a lot from the outside like nothing actually have the potential to transform our biology in very radical ways. And I may show you a few slides later on just to give you a little taste or a few grace notes about how things are unfolding in this domain now. But since the theme is the confluence of Dharma with science, I really feel like it's extremely important to recognize both the benefits of this kind of confluence that never ever happened in the world before, the wisdom traditions that are thousands of years old coming together with science that is really also thousands of years old, but began to move into its modern era with Leonardo da Vinci and Galileo and the Renaissance in Europe in the 17th century. And there are tremendous possibilities, wonderful benefits that are potentially available to us because of this confluence. And we're all engaging in this together. It'd be interesting to reflect on what even brought you to Benediktushofs for this, celebration of Willigis Jäger's life right now. I see most of you are masks, or perhaps all of you are masks. We're still in the middle of a COVID pandemic with the Delta variant. And I understand from reading the New York Times just today that Germany is in a very, very serious uptick in cases, in part because just like in the United States, there's a major significant fraction of the population that doesn't actually trust the science and that are anti-vaccination and feel like it's too dangerous for them to be vaccinated, whether they understand the true risk or not. And so that puts, in some sense, the entire society at risk. And so I will be talking some today about our responsibilities, not only for our own body and our own well-being, so to speak, and our own small networks of people in the family and so forth, or people who are like-minded, but a larger responsibility to the body politic, if you will. Whether it's Germany or whether it's the United States or whether it's what's going on at the moment on the Belarus-Polish border with all these migrants from the Middle East and Asia, South Asia, actually freezing on the border, small children dying, and caught up in this political insanity that actually harks back to the political insanity of 70 years ago in that same region of the world, as I don't have to tell you. So this is truly a moment where whatever Zen mind is really about, if it's not about waking up in the present moment, then it's really of no value whatsoever. Very often people will either clap or ring, clap two pieces of wood together or ring a loud bell within the monastery, within the temple during meditation retreats, during sessions. And it's always about the same thing. It's like, when are we going to wake up? Not just as individuals for our own well-being or benefit, because there are tremendous personal benefits that can accrue from the non-doing, the non-dual establishment of wakefulness in meditation practice, both formally and informally. But at this particular juncture on the planet, we are mindful enough of what's happening with global warming, with the disappearance of the glaciers, with the increase in temperature of the oceans, to recognize that mindfulness is not merely about the human body anymore, or one person's awakening. If the body politic as a whole, and that means 7 billion humans on the planet, and how we govern ourselves and what we understand about the nature of self and self-interest as countries, doesn't become the subject of our meditative practice and the vehicle for our taking action in the world, for letting our doing, which is absolutely necessary at this point of view in terms of action, in terms of activism, come out of our being, come out of the wisdom of non-doing and of wakefulness, then the prognosis for the human species as a whole is not a happy one in the coming generations. And since I'm guessing that those of you in the room, several hundred people I understand, and those of you in the larger room of Zoom and the internet, wherever you happen to be, are parents or grandparents, we have a stake. I won't say an investment, but we have some kind of profound dharmic, spiritual, human wisdom stake in leaving the planet under conditions that our children and our children's children and their children's children and on and on and on will be able to actually be able to live within, without creating nightmare scenarios that will just compound human suffering to unimaginable degree. So that's why I'm here this evening. That's why I want to help celebrate Willigis Jäger's view. He died basically, as I understand it, in March of 2020, which was exactly when COVID really hit. And we're still not out of it. And we may actually never get out of it, depending on how our public health approaches, how successful they are in our various countries. But we may have to learn to live with this kind of potential low-level threat, if it can be managed down to a relatively low level, so that at the same time, what's been lost in the past 2 years by virtue of all of the death and all of the lack of opportunities and the prevention of children going to school and at every developmental stage having to deal with that in ways that can be potentially tremendously harmful, or at least challenging. The level of stress and trauma that we've experienced on the planet, all of us, no matter how old or how young we are, really is going to require embracing on an entirely new level by public health, by psychology, by psychotherapy, by the spiritual embrace of community, in such a way that we minimize the harms that we've already experienced and maximize the potential for healing and for well-being. And if I knew something more powerful than mindfulness as both a practice and a way of being, to address those kinds of challenges of this moment for humanity as a whole, I would not be engaged in mindfulness meditation practice. I'd be doing whatever that alternative something was. But over the course of my own 77 years of life, I have not found anything, personally speaking, that comes anywhere close to the potential healing and transformative power of mindfulness, nor any kind of avenue that is so accessible and so commonsensical to human beings. And as I use the word mindfulness, I want to emphasize, because I know I'm talking to a primarily German audience, that the translation of mindfulness as Achtsamkeit is, I think, in some ways unfortunate. You all know this, of course, because you're part of a Dharma community. But Achtsamkeit really is a translation for attention. And it's really hard to find the right word to actually carry the deep structure of what we mean by mindfulness in the English language, or sila or satipatthana in, I'm sorry, not sila, but sati or satipatthana in Pali and in Sanskrit. And if there are any words in German, I'm led to sort of believe, and I'm told by other people, that it would be Gewahrsein or Bewusstsein, in the sense that, and I say this a lot nowadays to explicate what mindfulness is, that mindfulness is best thought of as pure awareness. It's not something you get. It's something you're born with. The capacity that is so right under our noses, so to speak, all puns intended, that we actually can go our whole life without recognizing that, following what Greta Thunberg says about her own challenges being on the autism spectrum, that it's actually a profound gift, and she uses the term superpower. And I think if there's any superpower that humans have, it would be the superpower of awareness itself, coupled with the superpower of compassion and kindness. And those are not, as I was saying, attributes or qualities that we have to acquire. They are intrinsic to our humanity, but as you know, our other superpower of thinking and being grounded in emotions that are incredibly beautiful, but also that sometimes create enormous separation and suffering, that we actually need to find something that's powerful enough to balance thoughts and emotions. And the only thing that I know of in our human capacity, our human repertoire, to balance the intense energies of thoughts and emotions, especially when they are primarily self-centered and driven by fear or hatred or delusion or ignorance, is awareness. It's that simple. But while we get a lot of training in thinking and all of the different ways of cultivating cognitive intelligence, we get almost no training in this other aspect of human intelligence that we're born with. That's, as I said, right under our noses, and that is Gewahrsein or Bewusstsein. So it's not something we have to acquire, which means that the non-dual nature of Zen meditation is absolutely essential and right in grounding itself in the Heart Sutra, the Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra, that very, very clearly, as you all know, states that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. And that there's no place to go, nothing to do, and nothing to attain, especially no special meditative state, so to speak, that will make everything better. That what we're looking for, to quote from St. Francis, which is, I think, very appropriate being in a Christian monastic space, is who's looking? And that's the true human question, is can we come to know ourselves enough as a species to actually wake up to how much we are our own worst enemy, and that we are, in some sense, polluting the planet in many, many different ways, including the way we think about things, the way we other people who are different from us, the way we can easily fall into sort of ussing and theming and racial injustice and dehumanizing the other. And this is really part of also the human repertoire, and the consequences of it are horrific, as I do not have to explain to you folks. But they are actually, you know, everybody is at risk of that, not just in the German-speaking world, but everywhere. We're all capable of that kind of loss of integrity, loss of our humanity in ways that can cause unimaginable levels of harm. So in some sense, I think what Willigis Jäger was pointing to, and what all Zen practitioners are pointing to, is to wake up to the actuality of things, including our own suffering when we do not embody the beauty of our humanity, but instead are grounded in our fear and in our greedy pursuit of the things that we think we need in order to make us happy and complete, a pushing away of everything that we feel might threaten us, and then complete delusion around real questions of direct apprehension of fact. And so, as you know from social media nowadays, I mean, facts have sort of gone out the window, and you can just have your own facts, whatever they are, and live in your own social media bubble where, for instance, you can be have all these ideas about how toxic the vaccine is, no matter how much scientific evidence is supporting the fact that it is probably the most safe vaccine that's ever been developed. And yet, if we are incapable of reaching our brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts and members of our own community who really suspect that the science is some kind of nefarious plot. And by the way, science is not some, sort of completely impeccable, always pure endeavor. There's a tremendous amount of, the history of science has a tremendous amount of complacency and engagement with seriously horrible human endeavors. So we have to question everything, but we also have to learn to trust evidence and weigh the risks versus the benefits. And that's what public health is always about, and it's always been about. So let me just say that MBSR, to come back to MBSR as a kind of example of how the Dharma might move into the mainstream of the world and out of various monasteries, or even out of the kind of languaging of it within the Zen tradition, or within the Theravadan or early Buddhist tradition, or the Vajrayana and Tibetan traditions. These are all streams of the same one Dharma. But the way the Dharma has worked forever is that it moves into different cultures, and then it finds its own place within those cultures. And if the Buddha were alive today, would be a really interesting question to imagine how he would incarnate to deal with the levels of suffering globally that we're experiencing now. And I think it's really important to say, although it sometimes alienates groups of people, that the Buddha himself was arguably not a Buddhist. He was a Buddha. And his teaching was not about becoming a Buddhist. Yes, to develop a Sangha of support, but not to reify an identity within that Sangha, so that we're the Sangha and those are the whatever you want to call them, but not us, the ignorant, the deluded, and so forth. Hey, if you've been alive for the past 20 or 30 years and part of any Sangha, you'll know there's as much delusion within a Sangha as there is out in the world of politics or economics or medicine or any other place. Delusion is not a kind of monopoly of any one particular group. And that's exactly the point, is that every single one of us needs to do our own work, both for our own trajectory for ongoing living. And in order to truly live our way into the present moment, we have to be attentive, we have to be awake. And when we are awake, we see things that we don't otherwise see. And then you know what happens from seeing those things, whatever they are? There's a certain learning that goes on. And what happens as a human consequence of learning? We grow. Whatever we mean by that, but we actually grow. We become larger in a certain way. Our hearts become larger, or we realize that our hearts are larger than we think they are. Our minds become larger, or we realize that how much larger they are than what we think they are. And then out of that learning and growing comes true healing. And I'm talking on every level, from the cellular and the biological and the epigenetic and the neuroscience level. On every level, there is a healing that goes on. And that healing is very different from our conventional view of curing. That healing is in my working definition of it, is not fixing. A lot of medicine is like an auto mechanics model of medicine. We're going to go in there and we're going to understand the mechanism and we're going to repair whatever's broken or wrong, even at a genetic level. We're getting there. I mean, the molecular biology and the CRISPR technology and so forth, for all its risks and so forth and ethical challenges, we are on the verge of being able to actually play God with our own biology, including the germline, which is tremendously terrifying. So this means that more than ever before, we have to cultivate a wisdom that is capable of handling that precocious power that the science is developing, and that's just in biology. And so from the learning and the growing and this healing, which in my working definition is coming to terms with things as they are. So it's not fixing, it's not curing, it's coming to terms with things as they are. That's what happens when we sit. We're not trying to fix anything, change anything, force our thoughts to stop or anything like that. As you know, that's a form of delusion. It has nothing to do with Zen mind. We're simply opening to the actuality of things and coming to terms with them, which means welcoming things as they are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then not immediately trying to push them away or pursue them or fix them. That turns out to be an incredible challenge. It's non-trivial. But the more one works at that interface, the more one actually discovers that there are profound virtues and benefits in non-doing, in practicing inner and outer stillness, which doesn't mean suppressing thought, as you know. Because then you could get into just battling with your thoughts for 100 years. But actually cultivating equanimity in a moment-by-moment way. So that means in no time, because the present moment is in some sense timeless. And then, so then whatever thought arises in the mind or whatever impulse, including fear or anger, we don't have to push them away and think, oh, we're a bad meditator because there's anger there. And we would say, I'm angry, but that's not correct. Anger is impersonal. It's just an arising in the mind. It's like a weather pattern, a storm or a cloud, as you well know. And so whether it's anger, whether it's fear, whether it's self-righteousness, whatever it is, we don't suppress any of this in the practice of Zen or Chan or Vajrayana or Dzogchen or whatever door into the room you want to identify with or move into. It's the same room, no matter which door. And so when we learn and we exercise the muscle of non-doing, of dropping into being, you're already awake, which is the root meaning, of course, of the word Buddha. So in this moment, you're awake, okay? Let me put it this way, just so you don't misunderstand me. You're awake enough for now. And if you're willing to be awake or enough for now, the next moment of now, the next breath in, is going to be very different because you were here for this one. And so over time, without trying to make anything grow, but in Thich Nhat Hanh's language, you're watering the seeds of your own heart. Something grows. And what's growing is access. It's clearing away the brambles and the paths and the impediments and the obstacles that we, for the most part, create for ourselves to this awareness which has been here all along. That's, as I was saying, our birthright. So let's take a few moments now, in case you think I'm giving you a lecture. I would say more it's a collective inquiry and a collective meditation that we're engaging in here. And let's recognize the power of silence, the power of stillness, embodied, intentionally invited to linger. And take up residency here in awareness itself. Yes, I know. very often it's helpful to have some instruction to, say, ground us with an object of attention that we can, in some sense, stay connected with and keep our attention anchored. And so, of course, if you're using the breath that way, or a sense of the body as a whole, the breath sensations, or a sense of the body as a whole sitting and breathing, or sounds, or thoughts are flitting through the mind, or your emotions, or the challenges you may have if you're listening to me in English and the German translation at the same time, which you may be doing, I don't know. But seeing if you can drop underneath all thought into the spaces between thoughts and the silence underneath the thoughts, those spaces being a lot like the spaces between notes of a piece of music. As Rilke so famously noted, observed, articulated, when he said, and I'm sorry I can't recite this in German with my eyes closed, he said, "I am the rest between two notes." I am the rest between two notes, which are somehow always in discord because death's note wants to climb over. Death's note. But in the dark interval reconciled, they stay here trembling. And the song goes on. Beautiful. Schön. So resting here in the silence of this song that is not just your life unfolding and your breath flowing, but the song of everybody in this room, whether it's the Benediktushofs room that you're sitting in or all of the other people joining online now or later. And here we all are together in the space of the boundless spaciousness of awareness itself and the boundless spaciousness of the human heart. So how intimate can you be with this silence that's inside and underneath and in between all words? With a stillness that has no problem with activity, with action, that makes no separation or distinction between this and that, us and them, past and future. Recognizing that it's all here now. It's all already here. And that none of it is the narratives that our thinking mind creates and then latches onto, some of which are nightmares and some of which are glorious utopias, and all of which are wrong and too small. Which is one reason why my own Zen teacher, Korean Zen teacher Song San, used to say, open your mouth and you're wrong. And yet, of course, if you agree to give a talk like this, of course, a talk of total silence would be wonderful. The Buddha did it at one point, and it's said that of the, as you all know, being in the part of the Zen tradition, it's said that of the 10,000 people who were there at the talk on Vulture Peak, they sat for 1 hour. Total silence. 2 hours. Total silence. 3 hours. Total silence. The mind started to sort of be perplexed. The Buddha's supposed to be giving a Dharma talk. Why are we just sitting here? And our bones aching, perhaps. After 3 hours or so, I wasn't there, so as you know, this is an apocryphal story. The Buddha reaches over and he picks a flower out of a nearby vase, and he holds it up to the 10,000 people without saying a word. And it's said that of those 10,000 people, there were 9,999 quizzical expressions. And this is all, sort of a gathering of mostly arhants and enlightened beings. And one smile, Mahakashypa's smile of recognition. And in the Zen tradition, as you all know, that's said to be the moment of the transmission of Zen. Direct from the Buddha to Mahakashyapa, and then the lineage that moved from India over the centuries to China, Tibet, Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Japan, Korea. Direct transmission outside the teachings. Direct pointing to the nature of mind. This was Willigis's, great joy. It's the great joy that can be shared by anybody who sits down and is willing to wake up. And yes, it's helpful to have guided meditation instructions so that we don't get lost or consumed in whirlpools of our own self-centered thinking or fearing or fighting with ourselves or anger at the way things are. Or, caught in the prisons of our own trauma through no fault of our own, but where then it becomes, in some sense, traumatizing to actually even sit with yourself unless you've learned how to approach the practice with a degree of gentleness that's often not so much the coin of the realm in the Asian traditions, where it was one of the things that attracted me to the Zen tradition was how hardcore it was, how tough it was when I was younger. But I think, there's a general trend for all that to soften, because a lot of it's cultural. It's not what the Buddha originally taught at all. But each culture has to, in some sense, take the Dharma, the universal Dharma, and transmute it without denaturing it, so that it's healing potential and transformative potential that comes out of that arc of learning, growing, healing, and then transformation of the relationship of you to you, and therefore you to the totality of everything. This is a natural human evolutionary arc. And is it hard? Yeah. It's only the hardest thing in the world. That's why the monasteries, especially in Japan, especially the Rinzai monasteries, you know, is like, it's tough. It's like military training, but a lot of the time, not just military training, but militaristic training. And we know there's a whole history of that. So at every level, we have to be careful of how the culture intersects with the universality of the Dharma and shapes it in ways that often are slightly, if not totally, corrupting. And the responsibility for that not to happen, that's on us. Every single one of us who's practicing. That's a hell of a challenge and a hell of a thing to say, but I think that if we're cells of the one body of the planet, then we each have to recognize that it's our responsibility to live our own life. And we can't blame anybody else for it, really, or admire anybody else and want to be like them. The only person that you could be like at all while you're still breathing is your own self, your own true nature that understands what we even mean by the word self and doesn't get caught in identifying with the personal pronouns, I, me, and mine, and then imprisoning ourselves in narratives that are way too small and way too inaccurate for the enormity of what a human being actually is and the beauty of what a human being is. And there's no one size fits all. There's no one outcome that's the best Dharma outcome. The best Dharma outcome is you, as you, fully you, waking up now. And if you wake up even a little bit in this moment and now, why isn't that good enough for now? And then, as I said, the next moment's already different because you've been at home in your heart in this moment. That's a practice. It's like a muscle that you exercise, and it's hard work. The Zen people have always been really clear about this, and Willigis too. This is like no joke here. It's the hardest work in the world for us human beings to even string 2 moments of mindfulness together, or Zen mind, or whatever you want to call it. Because our habits of thought and our habits of selfing and our narratives about how we're not good enough, or how, oh, I'd like to be like that person, or I want to be enlightened. I want to be enlightened. This language is incredibly dangerous. Because then you're not enlightened, but you're imagining what enlightened would be, but by virtue of the fact that you're not enlightened, you can't possibly imagine what it would be. Then you strive to operationalize that out of complete delusion. And that's what those clackers are all about, or bells, or whatever it is. It's like, stop it, wake up now, because if not now, when? You don't have another moment. We never have any other moment than this one. And sooner or later, the breath will not come in again. So let's not devalue the beauty and the power and the mystery of this breath that is exactly the place where COVID targets us, in the mucous membranes of the airways and lungs. And the ACE2 receptors, technically they're called, but this the coronavirus, this RNA virus, is not even alive. And German science has been at the forefront ever since there was such a field of bacteriology or microbiology, and Robert Koch and Paul Ehrlich and, these Nobel laureate physicians who helped us understand the sort of molecular nature or the sort of unicellular infectious nature of infectious diseases, and led to immunizations. And now here we are in Europe with a lot of people not trusting the legacy of, science that's been proved over and over and over again to be effective for, polio and measles and mumps and rubella and all the things that we inject into our children. And then all of a sudden we don't trust them, the government, whatever it is for this. So there's no separation between Dharma and life, between Dharma and politics, between Dharma and economics. Economics is all about priorities. It's about values. What do we value? And who are we to even value it? So if we value property over human life, or we value my own comfort over, the suffering of others, it's helpful to recognize that, because then we have to live with it in a certain way. And is there an orthogonal way of being in relationship to this, so that collectively, as a planet, as governments, as societies, as neighborhoods, as cities, as towns, we can stretch the envelope of our humanity to its full extent, which is boundless, as you just experienced in awareness. Because your awareness is boundless. I don't think you'll find the center of it, even if you look, and I encourage you to look when you're in stillness. Find the center of awareness. Not even located in the body. Where is the outer edge of your awareness? The circumference, the periphery, whatever you want to call it. You find that it's as big as the universe. And so humanity is like at a crossroads on the planet. And it's a really, deep question, is whether we'll solve the koan of this moment, of the human species, Homo sapiens sapiens, and make it through to the other side where we don't destroy ourselves, or make the world so horrific for the vast majority of people who will have no power and no access to resources, for the benefit of a very small number of people who will control everything, including what you're allowed to think and what kind of reality you will live in. So this is why Linnaeus named our species Homo sapiens sapiens, from the Latin sapere, which means to taste or to know. So if you want to know what a banana is, for instance, you don't go to the Encyclopedia of Bananas and look it up, its chemical composition and so forth. You bite into the banana. You put the welcome mat out for the banana as you bite into what's going on in your mouth. And you have the entire genius apparatus to be able to actually taste and smell. Just like with hearing, just like with seeing, all of our senses, embodied wakefulness, proprioception, interoception, these are universes that are part and parcel of our well-being, of our being. And is it possible for us to live inside them in such a way that we actually do take care of the whole body politic? So we're the species that is aware. That's what sapiens really means. It doesn't mean cognition. It's not cognition and metacognition. Homo sapiens sapiens is the species that is aware and is aware that it's aware. It's awareness and meta-awareness, awareness of awareness. It's pure Dharma. It's one thing to think it, it's another thing to live it. Especially when something is uncomfortable for you, even in the family. I mean, the family is the greatest monastery in the world for training if you happen to live in a family. The greatest monastery in the world is wherever you happen to be in the present moment. Your body, your community, your country, this earth. And so that's the promise of these meditative practices that, like so many other people, Willigis went to Asia to actually taste. And as a monastic in the, Catholic tradition, which is like revolutionary when you think about it. And there were a whole bunch of kind of renegades that said, okay, we get this and we're profoundly committed to it. But there's another door into this room that actually, because it's positioned in a different way, you get to see the world slightly differently. And why not understand the world from all these different angles? And of course, the church, as you know, had a very hard time with that. But Willigis was not at all intimidated by that, as I understand it, and he found his own way. And if a teacher does anything in the course of her life or his life, it's to demonstrate in a certain way the power of finding your own way, not to worship Willigis's way or any other teacher's way, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, whoever, your way with a capital W, like Weg, right? Also with a capital W, Tao. What is your Tao? What is your way? What is your Weg? And you don't have to fill up the space with answers. As Rumi said, let the beauty we love be what we do. In other words, let our being do all the work. And then out of the being in the present moment, the full wakefulness of this moment, or good enough wakefulness in this moment, let that be the signature of not only what we taste in this moment, but how we respond, how we engage, how we act, how we commit, how we love. Because when all is said and done, raise your hands. I can only see 3 or 4 of you, but I know there are several hundred people in the room. Could you please raise your hands if you have a regular sitting meditation practice? Okay, I'm feeling like everybody's hand in the room is raised because otherwise you probably wouldn't have come to bed. Okay, let me see that angle. Raise your hands again. Everybody, raise them up high so I can see them. I'm 4,000 miles away. Okay. So, have you ever thought that when you take your seat in a disciplined way in the morning, or whenever it is that you practice formal Zen sitting, or whatever your practice is, that that it's a radical act of sanity to stop and to drop into the present moment, whether it's sitting or whether it's lying down, or standing on your head for that matter, or walking. But have you ever actually thought that this is a radical act of sanity? Just to drop into being for a moment, and then a radical act, I would say, of love. A radical act of love. And when we engage in this personally or individually or collectively, it turns out that the world's already different because there's at least one foci of non-self-centered wakefulness in this moment. And that's infectious. That's like the coronavirus. That's its own meme. It's an infectious intention, an infectious love affair with life as it can be when we show up for it in our fullness. The good, the bad, and the ugly, at what we call in English, what I call the full catastrophe of the human condition after Kazantzakis' Orb of the Greek. I'm happy to see you now in a different view from the one that I was seeing before. It's really nice to connect with you. in this way. And again, I'm very touched to see the room. I have profound memories of sitting in the room and walking in the room for days and days at a time. And so I've spoken a lot, and I hope I've pointed out the pitfalls that we can fall into, not just the opportunities that mindfulness affords us, but the fact that in order to live a life of embodied wakefulness, we have to be really careful of the ways in which we fall into self-centeredness and then build on this story of me. And you can have a Buddhist story of me, or a German story of me, or an Austrian story of me, or a Swiss story of me, but it's still a story. And we're seeing now in the United States, to just not have it all be about your culture, a point that the historian Yuval Noah Harari makes over and over and again, that even nations are just fictions. And as long as enough Germans believe the fiction of the German nation, or Poles believe the fiction of the Polish nation, or Belarusians believe the fiction or another fiction or vision of the that nation, or Americans believe the fiction of America, then that country actually functions. But we're reaching the point in the United States where it's become patently obvious that that functioning could completely disappear. And that there are people that want it to disappear, to completely pull the rug out from participatory democracy, because the demographics of the country are changing, and now it will no longer be majority white. And all of the privileges of a society that's majority white are going to, in some sense, be called into question and disappear over the next few generations because of the demographic shifts. Of course, that's happening in Europe now big time as well. And so every country, whether it's France or whether it's Sweden or whether it's Italy, is being challenged to actually not just identify with its beautiful, insanely wonderful past, but also, of course, the other elements of history that are anything but insanely wonderful. But that also there's like a question of, well, what is Europe? If we're no longer just a bunch of individual countries, if we have a common currency, well, what's the common currency of the heart? And how does it relate to the rest of the world, which is only the same as Europe, only the world has to revolve a little bit, and then we're all in the same place every 24 hours. And we're all breathing the same air. And now all the billionaires are going up in rocket ships to orbit the Earth, or hopefully get off the planet and colonize Mars. But we're not there yet. But when you go up in the air like that to the reaches of space or into space, and you look back at the Earth, it's said that if the Earth were an apple, the atmosphere that we depend on to protect us from the solar radiation and to breathe, to use this remarkable respiratory capacity that took billions of years to evolve, and is the target of that RNA molecule that's not alive in COVID, that is easily lost. That we may not actually recognize what the opportunity really is here. And I would say that's our Dharma challenge of the moment. That's our Dharma challenge of the moment. Whether it's in America, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in China, to actually understand what true freedom is. And you can't be healthy in a society that's fundamentally unhealthy. And then the responsibility for this is completely distributive, so that all of us are responsible, because we're all cells of the one body politic. And as I like to say, if the heart and the liver went to war with each other, because the heart is obviously superior because it has contractile power in its actin and myosin and the way it does that to keep the blood circulating, like a miracle from the moment way before we're born to the moment we die, that heart is doing it day and night, sleep or awake. The heart is taking care of business. But the liver is also taking care of business. But if the heart doesn't like the way the liver looks and it says those cells, they don't have contractile power and they are, oh, so complicated, they're the wrong color and everything else, how long do you think the organism is going to last? So yes, we're differentiated in terms of lung tissue, in terms of liver tissue, in terms of bone tissue, in terms of blood, but it's all one seamless whole. If it all goes to war with each other, you've got autoimmune disease. And we have to be really careful that humanity, that Homo sapiens sapiens, doesn't become, and you could make the argument it already has, become the autoimmune disease of planet Earth. And I'm not talking about COVID anymore. I'm talking about, you know, all of the ways in which we can create nightmare scenarios. And that we're really good at doing it when the mind doesn't know itself. And the beauty that we're capable of when the mind does know itself. All the cathedrals in Europe and the, you know, Sistine Chapel ceiling and Michelangelo and everything that the Renaissance gave us with Leonardo and you know, throughout Europe. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the earth, Rumi said. Well, there aren't hundreds, there are an infinite number of ways, and every single one of us is part of that adventure. So I'm going to stop here. I would like to suggest that this time that I've been talking is in its entirety a guided meditation. It's not really, I haven't rung any bells. I haven't said now we're going to be sitting and attending to the breath or resting in awareness. My hope is that you've been resting in awareness the entire time. I know it's much later for you than it is for me here, and I know I've spoken for a long time. I just want to honor the fact that these are precious moments. A gathering like this at Benediktushofs is incredibly precious. So all of you have, in some sense, voted with your bodies to come and to be in that sacred space tonight and to honor Willigis Jäger and his legacy. And so if you have the stamina to do it, I would like to open this up to dialogue, which is really in many ways the true beauty of all meditation practices, what's called in Japanese mondo, or back and forth, the way such beautiful traditions of just checking each other's minds and listening deeply and not getting caught in the words or narrative or fakes, but actually embodying a longing for being the beauty that you already are. And the love affair when you take your seat in the morning is just the smallest part of it, because the real meditation practice is life itself. It's not what happens in the zendo or on the cushion, as you all know. It's how you live your life from moment to moment to moment. So let's stop here. I want to thank you for your intention. And then I'm not sure exactly how much time is left. By my understanding, it's 3/4 of an hour. I don't know if that's true from your point of view, or however long or short you want it to be. I'm flexible, but I'm open to having some dialogue and questions and answers if you'd like to.
Let's open this dialogue.